Welcome back to Shoot Punch Kick, the podcast where three buddies from Brooklyn revisit the best and worst and whatever of 80s and 90s action cinema and beyond. Today, Dash, Carlos, and I are going to discuss the 1985 Chuck Norris vehicle Code of Silence, which was a first time watch for all three of us.
Yep.
Film was directed by Andrew Davis, the man behind such modern classics as The Fugitive and Under Siege, and co-stars Henry Silva, Dennis Farina, and one of the cast members of Herman's Head.
Yeah, I caught that. I was gonna bring that up.
How you guys doing?
Nice.
Doing good. I watched
What's
this
up,
earlier.
my people? What's going on? Y'all repping for my Boricuas. It's the Puerto Rican Day Parade weekend. I don't know if you can see it. Que bonito bandera. I'm sorry, guys. The Puerto Rican is going to be shining.
You're going to
all
timestamp
day
this
yesterday
episode now. Okay.
and all day tomorrow.
People are going to put it up next to the calendar. Google, when was Puerto Rican Day Parade?
Well, this isn't live. Okay. Yeah. So, so I think this is going to be an interesting episode because this is the first time, this is Chuck Norris's first official appearance on the podcast. And he's an action star that I feel like, especially these days, isn't really talked a lot about. And even though he was a mainstay of action cinema throughout the 80s. So I just want to see you guys and what your history was with Chuck Norris, if any, or Chuck Norris movies.
Dash, would you like to proceed?
Yeah, mine's small. We got our movie with Bruce Lee, and then Sidekicks. So that was about the extent. I know.
Bookend, yeah.
Yeah, I knew that other movies that he's done, but they just never appealed to me. Like I went to the video store every day, and I picked up the cover for Delta Force, K9 Dog. I think was another one that he had. They just seemed very military action movies, and as a kid, I wasn't that into it. So Sidekicks was like the one that was for my demo of like 10 years old, another kid in the movie, part of the whole like karate phase of like the early 90s. Wasn't into Texas Walker. My great grandmother watched it, which made me less likely to watch it. So this is like my first real like 80s heyday Chuck Norris movie. So we'll talk about that.
For me, he has always been somebody that like I knew about and was always in like the eye. For me, it's a little bit different. My dad was again a super martial arts movie fan, and so of course, he did that movie with Bruce Lee where he got his chest hair ripped off. And my understanding, at least from that point, was from my dad, like Chuck Norris is a guy who actually gets respect out in the martial arts community as somebody who would actually went out there and won a bunch of tournaments. I mean, again, it's like point fighting, so it's not exactly bare knuckles or anything. But when, Seagal and these guys came out, my dad would always be like, would always point as Chuck Norris has the American kind of like, this guy can actually fight though. But again, like you guys, his movies never really kind of appealed to me specifically. Again, he's a karate guy, and so a lot of times karate doesn't really lend itself to screen as well as like kung fu does. It's not as like made for the screen. So his movies never appealed to me. However, what I will say is more recently, I've loved who Chuck Norris has become. Right, the myths. He doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down. Right, like all of those. And so I'm way more a fan of the myth of Chuck Norris than his actual body of work.
Which isn't his body of work. Like somebody, they're jokes. He's a punchline of a joke, which is awesome.
It's kind of like awesome when Norm Macdonald was on Saturday Night Live and he just used Frank Stallone as a non sequitur.
Yeah, that's right. That's a throwback. Okay,
but what's interesting though about Chuck Norris and just going back and doing this podcast is that like back in the day when we were younger during the heyday of Chuck Norris, we were kids and he was kind of like the old guy, right? But now that we're older and we're almost we're the same age, if not older than Chuck Norris was during this period. It's fascinating to go back and watch these movies.
Around the same age. It's same age-ish.
I'm older than Chuck Norris was then in this movie. And speaking of this movie, so let's get into it. So Code of Silence. Here's a brief plot breakdown from our AI overlords at ChatGPT. And we always run this synopsis to see how well the AI is doing. So here we go. Code of Silence is an action-packed film starring Chuck Norris as Eddie Cusack, a tough and principled Chicago cop. When a routine drug bust goes wrong, Cusack finds himself caught in a deadly war between two rival drug gangs. As he delves deeper into the criminal underworld, he uncovers widespread corruption within the police force. Determined to bring justice, Cusack defies orders and takes matters into his own hands, using his martial arts skills and unwavering resolve. With intense action sequences and a gripping storyline, Code of Silence showcases Chuck Norris at his best, fighting against crime and corruption.
Mm. I don't think that it was as widespread, the corruption, though I like that it's framed that way because it is a bunch of police turning their back on responsibility. But, generally when you think of corruption, it's like you would think this was like Serpico based on that,
Right.
of like everyone just being on the take. And
Yeah.
with this one, it was
Yep.
really just the thin blue line as the department wide corruption. So I thought the ChatGPT oversold that.
Yeah, I think the inaccuracy here is the martial arts aspect of it because going into this film, I think purposely they downplayed that in this movie and made this was more of a conventional sort of police action thriller versus a
Mhm.
martial arts film, and that's something that critics noted. But yeah, wanted to get both of you and your initial reactions to the movie. So, Dash, thoughts?
Overall, I didn't know that it would be so heavily reliant on the story as opposed to the action. When we watched the trailer, they said this is Chuck Norris's most dramatic role ever, and I was like, whatever that means. But this one had like a lot of layers to it. I did not expect an essay on police reform and why
Mhm.
it's important. But I didn't expect to like it, but I did enjoy my time with it, and this was different from what I thought a Chuck Norris movie would be. So I had a good time with it. I think it had a lot of the staples of what this podcast is as a mid '80s action movie that came out. So I had a good time with the movie, and I'm glad I watched it.
Yeah, this is definitely a departure from what Chuck Norris was
His
known for
normal
at that
Mhm.
movies.
time,
Yeah.
and this is also considered his arguably his best movie from a critical standpoint. But Carlos, how about you? What are I sent you disagree.
Yeah, I guess I'll be the voice of dissent, possibly on this podcast. I have in the since we've been doing this podcast, I haven't had a harder time connecting with a movie than I did with this one. For an example, one of the things that I do to prepare for the podcast is the first time I watch a movie that we're going to be discussing, I take notes. Right, like I don't know if you can see, but like I take
Oh
pages
my
and
god,
pages of
Damn.
notes.
that's like a psycho killer's
I
Yo, this
notebook.
is like yo, I'm
It's
not a
like a
girl. It's
notebook
like
from
Yeah, it's like a
right,
Seven and
serial
shit.
killer.
right. Like these are the notes I'm taking.
With all the
Right,
people he
and
wants to murder. Yeah.
yeah, and well, and also to be fair, I'm actually really impressed at how well my handwriting looks in the
No, that looks
writing in the
amazing,
dark.
man. That looks like a
Yeah,
prop
Uh,
in a movie. Okay,
I
but
know.
right,
uh,
but go on.
S-
Let's talk about Chuck.
so the reason I do that is just because sometimes one thing will occur to you at the start of a movie and then
hmm
later on it becomes a theme and it becomes something that we can discuss on the pod, right? And so I'm pages and pages, and this is the first time where I started writing notes, and then right around that, after that first shootout sequence, I
hmm
got that, let me look up Chuck Norris, let me look up whoever, right? And the next thing I realized is that I went down that rabbit hole and I missed like 20 minutes of the movie. So I went back and started watching again. I saw another 5 minutes, and then my phone started calling me again.
hmm
I did that, and so this is the first time I have notes for like the first 20 minutes of this movie, and I couldn't bring myself to make any more notes for the rest of the movie. And then I tried again to watch it this morning, thinking, maybe it was just I was in the right mood or the right setting to really get something from this. And this morning I got the same reaction. So I really could not connect at all with this with
hmm
this movie.
Yeah, now and for me, yeah, I was sort of in the middle in terms of the movie. Liked what it was trying to do, and the fact that it was made for about on a $7 million budget is pretty impressive, and I could see why
Mm.
this became a springboard for Andrew Davis to bigger and better things. Um, but yeah, and I wonder if it was because of Chuck Norris as the star, or it was the script or the story. But let's dig into the story a little bit because a lot's going on here, and I don't think all of it sort of comes together
hmm
really well. But Dash, what are your thoughts on just you mentioned some of the themes, which I thought were pretty noble, And
Mhm.
if a movie like this with the same storyline were made today, I think the story would play out completely differently.
Yeah.
But what did you overall? What was your thoughts on just like the plot and how the story was told?
Well, I do wonder if it would have played out differently because the story itself is, I think, very in line with like when I watched this, I was like, this seems like the movie that they want to green light after like all the George Floyd stuff of
Hmm.
that's been going on. But the I think the thing that would mostly be different from then and now is the tone. And I think that's what makes it feel like a lot is going on because there's certain moments that are like a little over the top and it's like Chuck Norris is giving a speech on the morality of the police, but he's like a kind of terrible cop of like just working on his own. He has a partner. He's just like, don't help me, and then everything goes haywire and people are dying constantly. He's not like he doesn't have a huge track record,
I
but
think also, I'm sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to say, I also think they just don't do a very good job of weaving there's so ostensibly there's two kind of stories going on, right?
Yeah.
Like there's the story about the mob guy who betrayed everyone to like make that money and trying to catch him and his daughter and
Hmm.
right, and then there's also the police thing, right? And I remember watching the movie, it occurring to me like the whole start of the police problem is that this guy accidentally shoots a bystander and then tries to like basically get away with it, and then they kind of go into the mob side of that story, and I completely forgot at a certain point. I'm like, did they just drop the whole? It seemed like they didn't get back to the whole
Well, that's
court.
the funny thing
Okay.
about that was, and it's one of my notes was I didn't realize how important that moment was until the
Was
court scene, which is like an
yeah, yeah,
hour later,
Yeah.
because
later,
it's so kind of like glossed over. Where even
yeah.
the cop who shoots the kid, he's like, "Oh, what do you mean? There's like the way they bring it up is like a just a small kind of case," and then
Yeah.
an hour later that like the police are there taking pictures. Like they tried to make it seem like it was a big like civil unrest going on,
And
but
it
the
also
stakes
it
never seemed high
and the way they
with that.
treated the shooting of the kid, it was to me at least, it felt a little ambiguous in terms of the younger cop, whether he
Mm-hmm.
actually
You
saw
gonna tell
the
or
gun
not?
being
Mhm.
planted or not. So I wasn't clear if he sort of knew what was going on. But to your points, yeah, the storyline, the whole thing with because the movie is called Code of Silence, which implies it's about this code of silence of cops kind of protecting each other,
Yeah.
and that's
Mhm.
really not what the movie's about. It's really about like this gangland, sort of like uh, two warring gangs, and
Mhm.
Chuck Norris being caught in the middle. And that whole
Mhm.
thing with the kid being shot is just feels like a
Add it on like
kind of
afterthought.
unnecessary side plot.
Also,
Um,
the way that that scene played out, at first, I wasn't too sure. Like, so I was definitely sure that they planted the gun in
Yeah.
his hand, but the way he runs out, they never really show where he runs out of. Like, it
From
wasn't like he was just having dinner. Like, they just have the sound of the background of, like a woman screaming or crying, and you have to kind of put two and two together. Now, I don't think it was to the point where it was like very confusing. You clearly, are supposed to know what's going on, but I just thought that was like a weird presentation of it where it wasn't as like I felt like you really should hit that point over
yeah.
the head of like this is clearly a because until he planted that you're kind of like, is he involved? There were people
Mhm.
popping out of all the rooms. Some people got
Mhm.
away, some people didn't. Then like it was a little bit messy of where everyone was in the action because you have the thieves climbing out the window, you had Chuck Norris on a different side of the building, you had the cop who shot the kid in the front, I guess, with like, then they had people outside. And I thought that that scene was a little bit muddy for something
Yeah.
that's supposed to set up the whole rest of the
I
movie.
mean, it's the name of the movie, right? Code of Silence, right? Like
Yeah.
that's like
Yeah, and that's
a
really not
pivotal
the point
part.
of the movie.
And well, but yes, exactly,
Hmm.
right. It's more the gang war, and that's kind of the side thing of it.
But
So
no, but I would
yeah,
say like the second hour, it does become a big part of the movie. But by then, you're like, wait a minute, like it was a
yeah,
little, it's not weaved evenly,
Yeah, it has
and
nothing to
it's
do with the third act, right? With the
yeah.
finale, and I thought,
Well,
they could have
just the
fixed
fact
that.
that the
They
cops
could have
aren't
fixed
there.
that very easily, and I thought maybe there was just, that Chuck Norris could have been the partner of the guy, and he's got to,
Yeah.
grapple with this moral dilemma. But and there were like three writers involved, and maybe that goes back to the origins of the script, because this was originally written as a Dirty Harry sequel,
But
and
that's the thing
Clint
that's
Eastwood
that
turned it
kind of
down.
but that's what makes it kind of weird because the whole like big culmination of this code of silence in the movie is that he has to do everything alone at the end.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the point of that if you've always been alone
Anyway, so like,
before that? So
wouldn't it be cooler? I think for me, it would have been even more effective to completely get rid of the partner who had the dilemma. And you're
Mhm.
right, just make Chuck Norris the partner of the guy who shot the guy,
Yeah.
and now he's dealing with the dilemma of should he talk or not,
yeah,
right? And then I
Yeah.
feel like that makes it a little clearer and less muddy and a little bit more clearly defined. But I get you wanting to make Chuck Norris this paragon
Yeah.
and
yeah, but
Well,
he's
owner.
he's
also one note for the
yes,
whole.
exactly. So I think that's what I was getting at because this was written as a sequel to an existing series. There's not there assume we assume there probably wasn't a lot of character development because this is a couple of
They
movies
figured he
in the
already know
Dirty
the guy.
Harry franchise, and we don't need to go into their backstory. But I think that hurts this film if they basically just kind of ported this over because Chuck Norris has no character development. You have no idea who this guy is, what he does when he goes home. He just
Yeah,
lives to be a cop. And let's start
And
talking about Chuck Norris a little bit because
okay.
because his characterization is paper thin in this
yeah,
movie. And the only thing we know about him within the first act, and I'm glad they dropped this, but I thought the whole Rubik's Cube thing was going to be his
Hmm.
defining
yeah.
characteristic.
I thought, and he
Um,
solves it by the
yeah,
end, and
right,
he
or
like
something
tosses
like
it and
that.
all that.
Yeah, and I was like,
No, his
please don't
defining
let
thing
this.
was the neckerchief he's wearing in that first
Yeah,
scene.
that too. His
He's
like, yeah,
wearing
his
a
howdy
neckerchief.
doody outfits and stuff. But yeah, I thought like let's talk about Chuck Norris in this movie because yeah, this was definitely atypical of him. Apparently, I'm also not very familiar with his filmography, but what do you think was his appeal during this period that made him a star and an action star?
I think it's probably what you were talking about before, which is that credibility. Like with karate and stuff like that, definitely the Bruce Lee rub. I'm sure people were like, yo, there's this dude, Chuck Norris. He's like representing, for like, Americans
America.
on the
Hmm.
screen. And then even when you look at something like you go to a magazine stand, like Black Belt used to be like a magazine that you could buy anywhere. Like karate was so big in the 80s and like early 90s that, he had that like crossover. And, when you look at the movies that he made, like that's kind of what we're seeing some movies like if you take someone like John Cena who did movies the direct to they were all like the Marine, right? Like the Soldier, those movies are always kind of big in that direct to consumer market. And the 80s seemed like it was no exception with your Rambo, Commando. And then if you put Delta Force, which is a guy that people know, credibility as being a badass who can do this in real life, like I totally get the appeal. But for me watching this movie, I thought he had like no charisma. The
It's an
movie itself,
understatement.
yeah, the movie itself didn't lend itself to well, this one particularly wasn't a display of his martial arts skills. So I personally don't have the appeal. I don't see
Get
the
it?
appeal, but I
Mhm.
definitely understand it.
Get it?
Yeah, Carlos.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I have actually seen the Delta Force movies. I just never really loved them, and um, in those movies they do give him more to work with,
Mhm.
right? He's more this kind of troubled soldier, right? I guess almost in the mold of Rambo, but not quite as well pulled off as Rambo. I will, as much as I agree with everything you're saying, I think that this just also part of it was that this is not the right role for him, the way it
Mhm.
was written. Tonally, in the beginning of this film, I was actually really excited because I was getting this like 48 hours vibe, right? But look, almost a little bit more gritty. And I thought this movie was gonna have kind of like a gritty, dirty street vibe, but also with some uh, comic relief, which I think Dennis Farina was supposed to be. And I think that he was terrible in this. But I also think that what he was given to work with was also not much. I can't see like I could see Eastwood maybe pulling this off a little bit more, only because you had the backstory of the previous Dirty Harry movies. It makes a lot of sense. Now you said this is the first time I'm hearing it, and that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I wasn't impressed with him. But I think that's only half his fault because they didn't really give him a whole lot to work with either.
Yeah, I've never seen a Chuck Norris from beginning to end until this movie, and they used to run his movies all the time on Channel 11 in New York, here in
Yeah,
the 80s,
picks.
and he was every time you walked in the video store, there'd be some new Chuck Norris movie on the shelf. But yeah, watching
He
this
does
movie,
have charisma. He does.
Okay, okay.
I'm
I
gonna give it
from
to him.
this
He does
movie
have charisma, just not
from
in this movie.
because I
Yeah,
just
okay.
remember him as the villain, the bad guy, as Dash was talking about in Way of the Dragon, and just that hairy chest, and I was like, man, that you get that much hair when you grow up. I Fortunately I
Yeah,
didn't,
and,
but
and and even Bruce Lee gave him bona fides like when talking about
yeah,
that
no, he
movie.
gave him a
Yeah.
stamp
So
of
like,
approval. But
yeah,
I just for me, and I'm trying to be objective too, because I went into this movie wanting to like it, but I just like didn't see his appeal because he's so wooden. He's not emotive. However, as I was watching the movie, I could see like traces of maybe this is kind of like what Bruce Willis was going for later in his career, being kind of more stoic and understated. And then I definitely feel
he's
there's
smooth.
he was the precursor to obviously I think Steven Seagal and Van Damme were his successors. There's a lineage there because he was sort of the white guy that was doing Asian martial arts, and then they sort of took up the mantle and they had a I don't know about Seagal, but Van Damme definitely had a little bit more charisma.
No,
So
I would say Seagal definitely like in between the thing was with and like I was surprised to see that the same director I think was like Above the Law,
yeah,
was it like another Steven Seagal?
that was the
And
first Steven Seagal movie, so that he launched the Steven Seagal's career.
yeah, and I would say, like, in between, like, the way Steven Seagal he had a character with it. He was, like, a smart ass, he would, like, embarrass people, talk back, and
Hmm.
even with this, like, I think with,
Doesn't he
Chuck
have that?
Norris is, like, even though the script is pretty, one note, like, he delivered every line with the same energy. It was very monotone regardless of the situation, and that's where I feel like, there are, like in the script, there are moments that call for him to have a different delivery. Like his
Hmm.
friend dies. There's,
Hmm.
like someone's kidnapped.
Act,
There's, you
bro,
know,
act.
yeah,
It's
there's,
called
Right.
acting.
Like, yeah, when
No,
the girl is crying and she's like, "Can you hold me?" and he's just like, "All right, I guess."
yeah,
no,
like that's a,
he has
Yeah.
one good line. He says
He has no
when he's in the
sympathy
bar,
or
uh,
empathy.
when he's in the
if I
bar
don't
and
want
he's,
your opinion.
I'll
Yeah, I'll
beat it
beat
out of
it out
you.
Yeah.
of you. Yeah. Did he
Yeah,
coin
yeah, yeah.
that, or was that already out there?
It's hard, right? Because this movie's so old. Who knows? I mean, I've been using
Yeah.
that phrase
Yeah.
forever in my day to day life. If I had $1 for every time I had to tell that to my delivery guy,
Yeah.
You know what I thought was really funny, just about the story, the beginning of how they when they were doing the sting, they were using all these like baseball metaphors. So they were like, oh, we got a two a double play coming up. Oh, we're sitting out here in the
Mhm.
bullpen. It was like 5 minutes worth of these like baseball
baseball
puns,
puns.
and I was wondering how far they were
They were
they
gonna
were going
take
to take
that.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing they really take toward to the end is Dennis Farina coming up with some harebrained schemes, get
Yeah.
schemes.
I
But
liked his friend. What was it? She's a dental hygienist. Very
Very
oral.
oral.
yeah, yeah.
I caught that too.
So
But you
just a little bit more background on Chuck Norris, because I'm sure folks maybe that are our age just don't know his deal. But he made his film debut in 1968 in Dean Martin film The Wrecking Crew, where Bruce Lee was a choreographer, and they might have met on that
oh,
set.
okay.
And then he was in Way of the Dragon with Bruce Lee in 1970. I said 1968 was The Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
They also met
1972
in the tournament
was Way of
circuit.
the Dragon, but he didn't really get his big break until 1977 with a film called Breaker Breaker, where he played a trucker.
Breaker, breaker,
And then
breaker. I
he was
like
in a
it.
bunch of low budget movies that were profitable throughout the late 70s and early 80s. But it wasn't until 1984 when he did Missing in Action that he started to get some mainstream success. So this film was right in the middle at the height of his career.
Mhm.
Because after like one or two movies after this, everything goes downhill and it leads to Walker Texas Ranger in the 90s. But let's talk about the rest of the cast. So you got some great actors in here, including Dennis Farina, the great Henry Silva, who would end up appearing in Above the Law, and as I mentioned, Molly Hagan from Herman's Head, which was a favorite of mine back in the day.
Hell yeah.
But
Hmm.
any standouts for you amongst some of the supporting cast?
No, Henry Silva for me, just because a big Ghost Dog fan,
Okay.
Hmm.
and it was nice to see him in that. And the actor who played Craigie, where right when he started talking, I was like, "Where is this voice from?" And he's in Home Alone as the
Hmm.
tape that Kevin plays. So those stood
Filthy
out. And then
animals.
and the issue that I had with this movie with the casting was the IMDb page is not like at least on the iPad app didn't have like the cast and crew in the same like format that movies usually do. I don't know if it was something on my end, but
I'm looking at it now. It looks.
I
I mean,
couldn't
it's
figure.
got the cast.
Well, it just seemed like a who's who, so I was like, oh man, this is Billy Batts from Goodfellas. It wasn't Billy Batts, but I know I've seen him in other things, and it just seemed like a bunch of actors that I'm like, where's this guy from? Where's this guy from? So it was pretty cool. It was like an all-star cast of who is this guy again?
Yeah, for me, I liked. It's always nice to see Dennis Farina. He's like a comforting presence to see on screen. And of course, Henry Silva was good in the context as he could be. I guess one of the things I will say though is it seemed like a lot of the thugs. I forget who the actor is who played like Henry Silva's like henchman, the one who's in the shootout in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, he's you could tell he's a real Spanish speaker. Again, it's kind of a unique thing to me, but whenever I hear people who are supposed to be portraying Hispanics in movies, and then they speak Spanish, and as soon as you hear them speak Spanish, you can tell.
For anyone who's just tuning in, Carlos is wearing a Puerto Rican shirt. Just for anyone who's asking about his
not a hockey
credentials.
jersey. Yeah.
Who's that handsome coquille in the corner there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What authorizes you to speak on this?
My name is Carlos. Like,
there you go.
And he's official. What I was gonna say is that when I heard the gang members in the background, or even that one dude kind of talking in the beginning, you could tell he's a real Hispanic, and I always appreciate that.
So these weren't the Filipinos from
these were not
McBain.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, the cast was a mixed bag for me because I thought that some people were miscast. So Dash, you mentioned Ralph Foodie, the guy that was in Home Alone, and he was the cop that shoots the kid. He looked like he was like 80 years old, and like, what are you even doing on the force? He didn't look like a cop. It didn't believe it. He looked like Joe
Killing
Biden.
innocent people.
So yeah, I thought he was really miscast.
Yeah, boots on the ground.
And I thought Henry Silva was really underutilized because he's such an amazing character actor. He could do the sinister thing really well, and he's just kind of pops in and out of a couple of scenes.
Mike Genovese,
for sure. And okay, and then let's talk about the action of this film. And Carlos, let's start with you because you didn't really.
A quick side note, I also want to say, like, yes, not only were they miscast, but some of the worst performances I've ever seen. The police captain, I got so many people, I'm going to be walking the streets. Like, and again, I don't know if it's bad acting or bad writing, but again, some great character actors delivering some of the worst lines, some of the worst.
Well, there's a lot of like wonderful 80s tropes in this movie where you have the angry police captain, you have the party where everyone's doing coke. The factions and everything.
And then those two, what happened to those two guys who were trying to rob the police, the bar?
Yeah,
just a random story.
Just a random,
But I like, those are my two favorite performances in the movie when they're caught and they're talking shit to each other.
Yeah,
I think those are the best actors. But I'm sorry to sidetrack you, Telly. The action. The action is, what I will say about this is the same. A lot of things about this movie is that none of it was good. I don't think any of it was particularly bad, but there was nothing I took home that was like, that's dope. I was expecting there to be martial arts, especially when you have a scene where Chuck Norris is like training in the gym and he's doing all these kicks. And when he got into that bar, I was expecting him to really fuck shit up in a really cool way, and it wound up, he just looked like a fool. He almost looked scared. The choreography was terrible. The shooting was just a bunch of no one was taking cover. I will say the redeeming part for me was the final sequence with the robotic enforcer, the cheap ass Ed 209,
the Prowler robot.
Yeah.
The Prowler robot. That was cool. That was the point at which I'm like, finally cool. Like, it was the one time I was like really smiling in the movie. But I'm not gonna say it was bad action, but again, this movie is the definition of meh to me. I didn't find anything particularly interesting.
Dash?
Yeah, I'm not that far off from you. I will say there were some moments when the action where I was like, yes, and one of those was dude getting run over by a boat was crazy work right there. And I remember
fair enough.
This movie had a couple of moments where things would just happen out of nowhere, and I'd just be like, whoa, oh shit. That was one of them. The scene where he, oh shit, was it somebody got shot with the, oh no, the first guy who gets killed by the police tank, who like he explodes but
Loads.
then it's like propelled so hard into the water. I thought that was crazy. um it's wild because there was some stuff in the movie that felt like, if I told you about it, you'd be like, damn, that sounds really cool. I bet that was dope. Like, but it was just so
But it wasn't.
unmemorable. Like two people jumping off an elevated train into a river sounds fucking awesome, but the way that it happens, it's like very like slow, and getting from the hostage situation inside the train onto the top to being thrown, you're just like waiting to get there. The action, I'm surprised by all the things that Andrew Davis was later able to go on to, because this wouldn't give me the confidence of like, oh, let's give this dude a
No, no,
huge amount of
no.
money to tell an action story. So overall,
Yeah.
not very memorable
Yeah,
with the
well,
things
I
aside
think
from
It
a
the,
couple
showed.
the
moments.
most memorable scene is the fight on top of the subway cars,
Well,
and I thought what was fun. That to me was the funniest scene because number one, I was surprised that it was actually Chuck Norris on the subway car, and I don't know, the rigs and whatever they had set up, but you
Yeah.
could tell he's scared shitless because he barely moves while he's on top of
Yeah.
the car. It's like he's very nervous. You could tell. But hey, I give him props for actually being on top of that subway
try
car,
to
and
do that.
that's actually
Mhm.
him
I
there.
think a problem also. It's not that this movie's fault, but earlier in the day, before I saw this movie, just flipping through channels, the French Connection was on,
Hmm.
and it caught my eye because I didn't realize actually that was filmed literally across the street from my apartment. Right, that's the 86th Street train station
Hmm.
line,
Yeah.
and so because of that, I watched it, and it's the whole Gene Hackman's in the car, the guys in the on the train above. It's a very well known sequence, and I think up until maybe Heat or something, it was considered like the pinnacle of chase sequences in film. And I saw it, and it's just so expertly done. And so I saw that morning, and then later on that night, I watched this. And I think maybe without the context of the French Connection, I wouldn't have been quite so hard on this. But I'm watching this, and I'm just like, nope, this ain't it.
Mhm.
This ain't it at all.
Yeah, and both of you mentioned the lack of martial arts in this movie, and it's interesting because that happens to a lot of action stars where they want to kind of that ends up leading to their doom. They get a commercial hit out of it, and then after that, the movies go downhill. So that's kind of what happened with Van Damme. That's what happened with Steven Seagal. They're just like, okay, we want to dial back on the martial arts. I want to be more of a traditional action star slash actor, and then
That's why we
people were like,
came. What are you doing?
that's not why we fell in love with you, right? But I
Yeah.
just find that's an interesting trend we see, and same thing with like comedians that want to be in dramas, and their
But
moneymaker, they try to kind of bury it and do something different.
and that's the thing about it, because let's think about this for a minute. If you take the martial arts away from Steven Seagal, what the fuck do you have?
Well,
A
that's the thing. I
ponytail.
mean, in these movies, he's a cop, right? Like, that's the thing. And I could see falling back on this, but I do think that one of the things is with those is like, yeah, you are casting Chuck Norris or you are casting Steven Seagal, but you also need the stunt team. And I think that's what works in like, Hong Kong or with Jason Statham movies. Like, they work with a huge stunt team, where this movie, they just worked with probably Chicago extras, you know what I mean, with that. And I think that you see that in the bar. Like, if like rewatch that bar scene and look at anyone who's
No.
not Chuck Norris, they're not even standing in a
Yeah, yeah.
way that lends itself to to how you should act, and as a
The
part of
fight.
like a menacing group in a scene like that. So I think that that definitely increases your budget, production time of choreographing action
It's
scenes and fighting scenes, and that's probably a factor that goes into them wanting to step out of their kung fu shadows, but just also the amount of people like that uh Jackie Chan, and I don't know if you saw the Jackie Chan doc where they talked about how he did a lot of his stunts and choreographed his fighting scenes, and those guys next to him are as important as Jackie Chan.
Hmm. It's like a
Being
dance partner.
yeah, so
Yeah.
they these movies just don't have that. And if not, then it turns into Chuck Norris is, what is he, right?
Yeah,
Like in this movie, Chuck Norris is a cop. And I think there was enough in the script to make something like compelling. The story is cohesive. It's just he didn't, I think that you keep the script exactly the same and you put Clint Eastwood, it's a better movie.
It's a
yes,
better movie,
And
absolutely,
that's
yeah.
no
where I
question.
feel like it's not solely the script.
Yeah, well, I think, and Carlos would love to hear your opinion on this because this was a time in the '80s where you're either doing chopsocky movies or you're doing like Dirty Harry, straightforward action movies, and you didn't really have kind of the blend happening in American cinema. And I think Jackie Chan really, like with Police Story, I think that's when it was kind of introduced in a modern sort of setting. So I could see why they needed to dial it back, and I'll discuss that a little further when we get into the reviews. But Carlos, it's just strange that, yeah, as Dash was saying, why would you get Chuck Norris to be in your movie where you need an actor and not let him do what he's famous for?
Yeah, it's an odd choice. Again, you know, like I said before, if even Van Damme, I mean, again, at least Van Damme was like charismatic to some degree, so you can kind of see him in a leading role, just kind of off of his charm. He can play a playboy, rather well. But someone like Chuck Norris, and again, I keep on going back to, it's not that he doesn't have charisma. It's just that this he doesn't have the
The it
the
factor.
presence that you need for something like this to kind of work. So I think it was just bad casting choice. And again, all the other movies, even if you look at like Delta Force, it's there's some martial arts in it, but it's not a martial arts movie either, right?
Mhm.
He's doing more shooting,
Mhm.
and doing roles and stuff than he is kicking people, right?
Yeah.
And so, he can switch to just a purely action flick and do it effectively. But I think he just lends himself to more grandiose roles as like a soldier,
But I think
Mhm.
with
as a
those, I
cop.
because I feel like a soldier role, you can remove one aspect and then you can pump up the other one, right? So it's like you can remove the kicking and then soldiers are associated with war, weapons, multiple thugs. Like it's a not you
Knives.
can't really do
Mhm.
that in a city setting
That's
and
what I
as a
mean.
cop, and especially with one in a movie that's based on this, right? Like you can't just go around mowing down people where the
Except, except for the end of the movie and
I know,
where he
Yeah.
did.
except that he
Yeah, that's
does.
ridiculous at the end. But yeah, I think you couldn't like get away with just like a cop that knows kung fu and beating up people. That happens sort of later on
Because
in
I would
the
Yeah,
say like
'80s.
yeah.
that's the
Yeah,
difference with Jean-Claude Van Damme, where he
yeah.
is the spectacle, and
Hmm.
sometimes like he doesn't need that stunt team that Chuck Norris would have,
Yeah,
right? So, for example, if like in Time Cop, where someone shoots the ground and he jumps up and he does the split, like
yeah,
that's the if
That's what we
factor.
came
That's
for.
the
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
and it's not the kung fu, but it's like a spectacle.
And I think also this movie could have gone another way and it would have been more effective if they had, again, something more of like a 48 hours kind of scenario where you had a sidekick that was kind of a little bit more active in it, giving to add a different flavor to Chuck Norris's woodenness,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? So to play off of, kind of like, what's the Jackie Chan Chris Tucker,
Rush Hour.
like Rush Hour. It could have gone the Rush Hour way, or even
Yeah.
48 Hours to some degree, right? With Eddie Murphy playing that
Hmm.
role. But
Yeah.
this movie also was very self-serious.
Yeah.
So, right, again, now if it's trying to tell this serious Serpico-esque story, it's not going to work if you have a comedic sidekick. So
Yeah.
you either have to have a charismatic lead, right, like you had Al Pacino in Serpico, or you got to have, or you can't take yourself that seriously and make it into kind of a buddy comedy, right,
Mhm.
like you had
Yeah.
in,
I
in
think
Rush
that
Hour. And this is neither of those. It's got to
and I
pick
think
one.
during this period, because all the action stars had huge egos, they wouldn't co-star with anyone, so they had to be top billed. But let's get into the direction because I thought this was interesting. The fact that this was sort of the film that launched Andrew Davis's career as an action director. He made two features, I believe, before this, but this was his first big action movie. And from here, he goes on to Above the Law, and then he does something called The Package. But then he hits gold with Under Siege. Then he hits jackpot again with the Fugitive, and then a couple of movies, Chain Reaction with Keanu Reeves,
I
Collateral
can't
Damage
believe
with
this is the same
Arnold.
director who directed The
So,
Fugitive. This is crazy
well,
to me.
I mean, there's echoes of the Fugitive in here
Yeah, but
because
it's
of
way
the
better.
jump off of the subway. There was that big
Yeah.
jump in the Fugitive. But yeah, I was very surprised too because not that I'm a huge Andrew Davis fan, and I don't think he's ever done anything that like blew me away. But the film just comes across like a cop show from that era in terms of the level of action and the way it's directed. I don't think that he does Chuck Norris any favors in terms of how he films him. There's only like one badass shot of Chuck Norris, which is at the end when he sort of emerges and he's in silhouette and there's like
Mhm.
smoke billowing. But he makes Chuck Norris look really short in the movie compared to the other
Yeah, he
actors.
does actually.
Yeah,
He's very short.
so I just thought there wasn't a really loving direction from Andrew Davis. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work or seen his other films because I've only seen a handful of his movies. But do you see a style? Because I can't even discern what his style is.
It's surprising to hear that he directed The Fugitive, but thinking about it, he did have a lot more tools to be effective in that. It's based on a previous TV show, so he kind of had a playbook. Also, he had Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones
Yeah.
to work with, so and a much bigger budget, right? Like that, some set pieces. Under Siege, same thing. I just think that for this movie, he failed because he tried to make too serious of a movie with the tools he had in hand. He tried to make a gourmet chef meal with preschool, my first kitchen tools, right? He didn't have a charismatic lead. He didn't have very good writing in the script. He didn't have a good budget. So again, you're right, Dash. I completely agree. There's nothing particularly bad in this movie. It's just offensively bland
Mm.
and normal. And I think that I don't blame him necessarily. I just think somebody should have been like, bro, you don't have the tools to make what you want to make right now. So let's do something that we can with what you do have. Again, I think this would have been far more effective as either a straight action movie, a B movie, gritty action movie, or a buddy comedy film. But if you're trying to make a dramatic, again, for me, I feel like he's really, you guys, you said the thin blue line. For me, I was really thinking Serpico. And it's hard when a Serpico already exists and it's such a
Mhm.
great film, right? That you're
Yeah,
trying to do Serpico, but with action,
yeah.
and he failed.
Yeah, I didn't see this as offensively bland. I did feel this was just average. But you could see
Very
that
average.
he's a competent director. He could tell a
Mm,
story. He knows how to shoot Chicago, where he's from. I mean, I thought that was one of the pluses in the
yeah,
movie is that
it's
really
true. The
made
vibe,
great use of the location. You
for
felt like you
sure.
were in Chicago.
For sure.
And I thought people probably saw this and said, okay, he could do an action movie with a big star and get it done on a decent budget. Let's give him
Mm.
the next,
Yeah.
Seagal's
And
first movie.
you mentioned the previous movies we saw, even Avenging Force, right, which is technically, I think, not as competent of a movie, but I had fun with it. There was joy in it because I think to some degree it didn't take itself very seriously, and it felt like they probably had a really good time making that movie. Whereas this movie is technically a more competently put together film, but it felt very joyless.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
And
think
so,
that's why I felt that you would give this guy an opportunity to do a
Yeah.
future. So that was the context of that
Yeah.
because it's like the pieces are there, and I think when you say things like, he didn't have the actor to work with, he didn't have the script. Like you see what the actors and a new script, you get
could do.
Fugitive,
Yeah.
you get some of these other movies.
Yeah, because I think with this movie, with Code of Silence, Andrew Davis made an A- movie, and you could see that with a little bit more money, he could actually do a good movie. Whereas like something like Avenging Force, that's like a pure B movie, and you can't imagine the director like that director working with an A-list star.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but let's move on and talk about the box office for this movie. So it came out on May 3rd, 1985, from Orion Pictures, which is very interesting given the
Yeah,
robot connection because I thought the scene when they were showing off the Prowler reminded me a
straight up.
lot
RoboCop.
of the Ed 209 when they were showing off Ed 209. So
Yep.
I wonder if
Yeah.
someone from
Yeah.
Orion was like, What if what if we made a movie about the robot?
Do this for two
Yeah.
hours. Just this scene here. What do you guys think?
So
Because yeah, there because if you think about it, in this movie and in RoboCop, the police force goes against him, and he's kind of on his own. But obviously, that's a way better movie. But I just gotta wonder, like behind the scenes, was there
Mhm.
something going on with robots and police movies at Orion? But anyway, this came out on May 3rd, 1985. It opened at number 1, and it held the
really,
top spot for 2 additional weeks. So
Oh
this
yeah.
was a hit at that time,
and in May too, right? You said?
and
Did you say
and
May?
yeah, in May, and it was made
Almost
for
summer.
$7 million, and it grossed $20 million at the box office. And this was made. This came out after the first two missing in action movies, which made Norris a star, a mainstream star. And then there were two films that came after this, which were relatively successful, which was Invasion USA and Delta Force. And then from there, that's when the movie
I
started to
actually like Invasion
bomb,
USA.
and then he became Texas Walker Ranger about 10 years later. But this was arguably this came out at the peak of his career before those flops, and then before Walker Texas Ranger, and before the internet memes sort of revived his at least his name. I don't know if it really revived his career,
Career.
but
Mm.
I'm curious because you guys are a little younger than me. Did those memes like create any interest in Chuck Norris for you
No.
guys? So
No, just the
it was just a
memes.
meme, right? It was
It's
just a
just a meme.
meme.
But well, also again, unlike you guys, I have seen the Chuck Norris movies. I didn't never love them, so I already knew what he was about and knew that I wasn't for me. So it was just about the memes for me.
And the thing with the memes were they were really linked to Conan with the lever. And the reason why he had the lever was because NBC merged with Universal and they got the rights to show Walker Texas Rangers. So all of the real memes were only Walker Texas Ranger clips. It wasn't like, hey, remember Missing in Action 1? It was like, look how terrible the writing for Walker Texas Ranger is. They had, the kid from Sixth Sense saying, Walker told me I had AIDS. Like that's not, the takeaway you want from Chuck Norris's
He wasn't
decade
going for
long
that.
career.
Yeah, it was an ironic humor.
Yeah, I
Also,
was
to
very
be
like I
Marshall
was
knows way
just not a
better.
Chuck Norris guy whatsoever. So when those memes came out, I just ignored them because I'm like, I remember Chuck Norris in the '80s. He was never like this badass. So
Yeah.
I just kind of like zoned
That
them
makes it
out.
even funnier though.
But the funny thing is, it's so like when you watch the Conan, the context of the clips is that they're not. Chuck Norris became a meme after the lever, and the lever wasn't only Chuck Norris clips. It was really, like they had one where that like a chef, he's like 50 years old and he's getting beat up and he's just like talking back to the guys who are beating him
Beating
up,
him
and
up.
the
Yeah, I
joke is
remember that.
about this, tough old grandpa looking dude. So even on that show, Chuck Norris was obviously the face of the show, but he wasn't like the main joke. So I was surprised that they had all of these, different memes about that because that wasn't even what the lever was about.
Yeah. Well, and let's just go back in time for a second. So the week that this movie came out, when it opened number 1, here's some of the films that were on the top 10. The number 2 film was Just One of the Guys. Third was Gotcha, which I remember seeing
It's okay. She
the,
has
the
tits.
VHS cover. Then there's Police Academy 2,
Oh, which one is that one? Is
the
Oh
that
Super 4
Citizens on
movie.
Patrol?
no,
No,
that's three.
That's
their
three.
first assignment. So Police Academy 2, their first assignment. And then the number 5 movie was Mask with Cher, which was a depressing as
Smoking.
fuck movie.
Not that one.
And then there was Beverly Hills Cop.
Really? It
Yeah,
came out the same year as Beverly Hills Cop.
that was
Nah,
in its 22nd week in
still
May.
rocking.
Yeah.
Still
And
though,
then
this
the
is way
number 1
better.
movie the previous week was a Burt Reynolds movie called Stick, which fell down to number 7. And then there was Lady Hawk at 8,
Oh,
Desperately
Lady Hawk, I
Seeking
remember that.
Susan at 9, and Jim
Madonna in this
Kata
bitch.
is
Jim
Wait,
Cotta.
also opened that
Woo!
weekend, and it opened at number 10 that weekend.
Oh, we gotta watch Jim Cotta, man. We
Yeah,
gotta
so
watch
Jim
Jim
Kata was the
Cotta.
number 10 movie when Code of Silence came out. So we talked a lot about how this is considered Chuck Norris's best movie from a critical standpoint, and the reviews at that time supported that. So it was considered his best movie to date. Though the Vincent Canby at the New York Times said it could well prove to be his breakout picture. And Janet Maslin at the Times also said Norris's bid for a wider audience. Called the film Norris's bid for a wider audience, and it succeeds to a considerable degree. Gene Siskel says he also praised the movie. He said Chuck Norris takes a big leap in his film career with Code of Silence. It's been a long time between cop pictures that have any gritty feel. Clint Eastwood's last two Dirty Harry films were cartoonish by comparison. So he's putting this above some of the Dirty Harry movies. And then our friend Roger Ebert gave this movie 3.5 stars. And he says that this film is grabs you right at the start with a complicated triple cross and then develops into a stylish urban action picture with sensational stunts. How sensational? How about an unfaked fight on top of a speeding elevated train, ending when both fighters dive off the train into the Chicago River. And for reference, since Ebert gave this 3.5 stars, he gave Die Hard 2 stars, he gave Predator 3 stars, and he gave RoboCop 3 stars. So this to him is better than those three movies.
Well, he also thought
Reaction.
Dark City was going to redefine the genre for the rest of the world. So
No, I get it. I mean, this, like, if you on paper, if you're into this movie and if you're into Chuck Norris and what he's doing, this is a layered movie with a lot of plot threads and, you know, different storylines. And
you sound like a Norris stan right now, bro.
no, I'm just saying, if you're into this, like, I can see the argument being made that this is a movie with substance and grittiness and more than just your average action movie. I mean, come on, there's a court scene.
Well, what was interesting
have
when I
the
was
AI
reading these
generate a
reviews,
picture of
though,
you
a lot of
kissing
the
him.
critics were just dunking
Hey.
on Chuck Norris for doing martial arts movies.
But
And
also,
we-
too,
and-
like, what?
and
Oh,
and you
sorry.
got to remember at this time, like those types of movies were not respected. And I was watching the review of Siskel and Ebert that was on YouTube, the clip of them from their show reviewing it, and they were just complaining that Chuck Norris's old movies, they just like it's 15 minutes of just people beating the shit out of each other and doing martial arts, and it's like that's what we love.
Give me that. Give me
So there was
more.
like that bias there. But what's interesting is how they were shitting on those movies, but then like when Jackie Chan came out and he was doing the same exact thing, extending, obviously elevating it, but long extended fight sequences, they thought he was a genius. So it's very interesting the biases that these film critics had in the 80s. They were very snobbish, and I think that also speaks to just how that the film criticism world, as evident by this podcast, has really been democratized in the internet era.
Yeah, but I think it feels like its own world, though. Like, I think with this, like, if anybody in that bar knew karate, I would have been like, "Get the fuck out of here!" Like, you just can't do it.
But
like,
I mean, I think it was Above the Law where there was the same scene, or I'm thinking of another
but he
Seagal
made it
movie. He
look
goes
cool in
into
that
the
scene.
bar and he's like beating the shit out of everyone using
he takes
martial arts.
he takes a cue ball and puts it in like a piece of, I forget what it's, like a sock or something, and he's like, yo, that scene was done really, really well.
Yeah.
And there was literally a point where in this version of the scene, he's like, there's a bunch of guys coming around, and like you see him like flinch for a second, right? Which means that it seemed like there was no choreographing at all. He's like, all right, guys, you're just gonna act like you're gonna circle around me, and I'm just gonna go and punch you. Like, it just seemed unpracticed.
Yeah, they just don't make him look good. I mean, Andrew Davis just didn't make Chuck Norris look like this kind of like unstoppable badass, he's supposed to be in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And let's go to some of the fans and what they have to say about this movie. So obviously there was a lot of love from the critics, but also from fans of Chuck Norris. So going onto Letterboxd and looking for a recent top-rated review. This comes from Eric B. Film. He gave this 5 stars, and he says it's a robust blend of fantastic Norris action. Code of Silence combines excellent notes of crime drama suspense, mob family war, and the struggle for virtue and justice a cop must face on the mean streets. Add a dash of RoboCop and some high-flying karate kicks, and you have yourself a hit the whole family will enjoy.
Did he kick anybody in this movie?
I think that was one guy.
I think just when he was practicing in the gym.
Pads,
Yeah.
He didn't fly during any of them.
But I'm glad he noticed that RoboCop connection, because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I said they should have even though in this movie it felt just completely out of context and stupid, especially at the end, because how does like Chuck Norris know how to navigate this? You know, this is the 80s. This is 85
No, it
Yeah.
was like
technology.
AI or
Right?
something. I think it was what
Yeah,
it
yeah. This
said, right? It
wasn't
was like it
like,
could
you know,
Like
give him a
automatically.
presentation
controller.
mode.
You know, this was like some sort of like speed gun thing that he was
And it went
using.
on a rampage. It was just, it wasn't asking anybody to stop. It didn't say freeze. It's just like, if I see you, you're fucking dead. I
Yeah.
think even Chuck Norris was like hiding at some points from it, which I think was awesome.
See, I didn't get the thing bringing it back out because wasn't like part of that initial
He didn't like it.
demonstration. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
he
was
Yeah,
didn't
he
like,
like
"This
didn't
is a
like, he
piece
thought it
of
was
shit," and
stupid.
then he's
Yeah.
like, "I need your help."
Yeah.
it.
But it was funny,
Well, I mean,
but
also, I
also it was
think at that time,
underutilized because there should have been like a lot more henchmen there, and the robot should have just been mowing them down the way RoboCop
Yeah.
was in the
I
cocaine
think at
factory.
that point though, like in the '80s, there was just this robot craze,
Hmm.
where just
Hmm.
everybody like Rocky, right? Like they were just putting in robot shit just to put robot shit. This is probably right before Short Circuit, right? Like I think it was
Hmm.
just part of the what was popular culture at the time.
Yeah,
But that's what you want in a very realistic
right.
urban movie. Fucking
Real gritty,
Well,
you
I
know.
thought the themes, you know, that would be an interesting for a remake. Just the themes of like some of the themes in this movie around technology and just corruption and the police force. But
Code of silence with the
yes,
robotic police.
Hell yeah.
but however, there
It's literally
going
code,
to
Morse
some of
code.
the fans or some people that don't like this movie whatsoever. So a half-star review from Simon Powell on Letterboxd says, I got this mixed up with Silent Rage, and instead of freaky sci-fi horror nonsense, got this sub Miami Vice Macho Man garbage. Henry Silva, Dennis Farina, and a brief John Mahoney cameo are always worth watching. And the Prowler predates Ed 209 by a couple of years. But other than that, nuts to this tripe. Okay.
Nuts
Sounds
to
like a
this
Brit.
tripe.
I never heard that term before. Is that a term?
Yeah, I'm gonna start using that though. I like it.
Yeah,
I kind of
nuts
to
like
this
it.
tripe.
Nuts to this tripe. Okay. So let's wind this down. Carlos, let's start with you. What was your favorite scene in this movie that you don't like?
My favorite scene was that final sequence with the Prowler. Just because again, it was definitely the most attention I paid to the movie, right? Like if I was stressing to keep my eyes on screen for a majority of this movie, that was one point where my phone was put away and I was just like, and again, something about the like, yeah, like you seen somebody get just blown out the fucking right into the water and stuff. That's kind of what I came for, and if I got again any joy out of this movie, it was that scene.
Okay.
I
Jack.
like I like the two scenes. One where they were in the model place, like and the dude sniffing coke and just going woo woo like every time he sniffed coke. I thought that was really funny and had like the funniest part of the movie where he realizes that Chuck Norris is a cop. And then I like the end. And this will be probably a theme of the podcast. I love like 80s trope stuff, and I love like the good feeling resolution that the 80s were able to get, like where everything culminates. And first off, what we didn't talk about, one thing, I thought the music in this movie was really good at parts. There were some parts where it felt like porno music.
That's what I felt it
Sometimes,
was in the opening. It felt like porno music.
yeah, but they had
Especially
they
John
had
Holmes to show
one
up.
they had one track though
I was
where
getting like 48-hour vibes.
yeah, I mean, there's like a serious track that they had, and it was when they tell the girl like her mom and family was killed, and they used that a couple of times, and they use this for the end where I thought like for the story they were trying to tell of people not being able to turn in this one bad apple, then him
Mhm.
not being able to trust anyone, and they show up to the dock after everything's resolved, and he says, should I go back to work? And the guys all like kind of like silently salute him. I love that. It's so cheesy, but I
Mm,
liked it. And I thought
fair
ending the
enough.
movie on that, though there was one really weird moment in that, which is where he kisses homegirl on the head after like he
Yeah,
saves
yeah, the
her.
forehead kiss.
Yeah, thought that was like super weird and unneeded. Uh
Again, they probably called for there to be more of a romance there, but there's just he's so wooden that there couldn't have been any
Well, it's the
chemistry.
'80s too, because I think she was supposed to be like a teenager or something. So
Oh, is that
it's
right? I
just
thought
like
she was
she
in
looked
college.
older.
oh
Yeah, I think she
yeah,
looked
yeah,
Ah,
older,
yeah.
but
okay.
she was supposed to be younger. So that was like a little confusing for
Ah,
me too, because she looked
okay.
like she was of proper age
Yeah,
maybe for
yeah.
like an
Yeah,
on-screen romance. But yeah, I think she was supposed to be like a kind of a kid.
it was weird.
Okay. My favorite scene is the subway fight because it reminded me of Police Story One when Jackie Chan's on top of those double decker buses,
Hmm.
and maybe that's where he got the inspiration from. And I just miss practical stunts. You know,
Yeah.
today that this would be done on a green screen and CGI and whatever. And I just like seeing the fear on Chuck Norris's face while he's standing on top of the subway car.
And we said
Oh,
he couldn't
That's
act.
good
yes,
acting.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's good
that
acting.
was his best
He was like, I
performance in
wasn't
the movie,
scared.
where he's like,
Nah,
"Holy
I was
shit, what am I
acting.
doing?"
I was
Yeah.
method.
Okay, so let's get down to the rating. Dash, how about you kick it off?
All right. So,
It's gonna be
that
out of 5.
yeah, I'm not gonna make any apologies about it. I did like this movie more than I thought I would, but I don't ever see myself watching it again. So I'm gonna give this 3 one-man units out of 5.
Okay, Carlos.
I am gonna go once in the opposite direction. Normally, I go with like what I think it's worth, and then my personal viewing. So I'm actually gonna go down. I think it's a competent enough movie, and there's nothing that's terribly specifically wrong with it. I think it probably deserves a 2.5. When I want your opinion, I'll beat it out of you. Out of 5, but because I didn't have any joy in this movie, I didn't get any joy from the making of it or watching it. I'm gonna drop it down to a 2 out of 5.
Okay. Yeah, I give this 2 Rubik's cubes out of 5. And for me, a 2 is just like it's competently made, but I'm never gonna revisit this again.
Hmm.
And there's nothing memorable about it. But it's interesting to see Chuck Norris in a quote unquote good movie, and also interesting to see sort of early Andrew Davis, and kind of when you look at, because I've seen some of his later movies and just comparing that to where he started from. So all right, so I think we generally sort of fall into the same camp. We weren't blown away by this movie, but it
Hmm.
was an interesting watch. All right, so that takes us to next week's episode, and Dash, you're up.
So based on this movie, I was actually thinking about picking this movie for the last few episodes where I got the honor, and I'm gonna stick with Henry Silva, and we're gonna watch Ghost Dog: Way of the
Oh,
Nice.
Samurai,
Fucking love that
directed
movie.
by Jim Jarmusch and starring Forrest Whitaker as well as Henry Silva. I really
Awesome. I fucking love
like
this
this
movie.
movie,
It's
and
a
I
good
think it'll
one.
be cool to talk
And,
about.
now I love this movie, and I haven't seen it in 15 years. So this is a great.
all right, good
Good
time to
job,
revisit it.
Dash. Good job.
Yeah, and I don't know where it's streaming, but one thing that
I'm gonna buy
will
it.
yeah, one thing
I will
that this
buy it.
will get me, it is a Criterion collection. Some of the
Is
stuff
it?
is pretty dope. They come with a little Hagakure, the
Ah.
quotes in there. But
Okay.
this will give me a good reason to watch some of the bonus
Oh, so
features
you
that I've
you already
been.
have it?
Yeah,
You have the Criterion version?
yeah,
Is it a Blu-ray or is it 4K? Is
I
it
believe it's a
4K or
Blu-ray. No,
it's
this is a
1080?
Blu-ray. Yeah,
I want to see if maybe they have it in 4K. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna add it. It needs to be added to my collection. I fucking love that movie.
me too.
Okay, well, that
The RZA
concludes this
RZA.
week's episode of Shoot Punch Kick. So please make sure to tune in again, like, comment, and subscribe, and do all that social media shit. So until next time, we'll signing off. Telly, Carlos, and Dash.